All righty. So it looks like something happened with my internet connection. Rick, I'm sorry about that, but it looks like we're on now. Hello. Yeah, I think I must have logged myself out or something. So hi, CSW
yeah, I
members.
saw you disappear.
Yeah, okay, so we're live now?
No. Okay. So if we're ready, I'll hit the start live button for you, Alexandra, just in case there's something happening on your end, and then you'll see the little countdown happen on the screen and the timer on the top right counting up, and then Rick, you may begin.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
Have a great call.
Thank you. All righty. I think we are live now, it would appear. So hi, everyone. Sorry about that. We're having a couple little technical things going on right now with our systems. Welcome to the new normal of work from home life. But thank you for joining us today. We're so happy that you've joined us, as always, from wherever you are, wherever you're at, for another hour-and-a-half webinar with the CSW today. Today we have an incredible webinar presenter, as always. This is my second time working with Rick, and I am just so honored and privileged to be here and to be able to work with Rick again. To have another almost second follow-up of our first webinar that we did on social work and drugs. So thank you for being here. A couple quick little housekeeping notes before we dive into the presentation. One of them I'd like to say is that your screen is completely customizable. Thank you, everyone, telling us that we're live. I appreciate that. Your screen is completely customizable. You can make me bigger, or the presenters bigger. You can make the slide deck bigger, and just move it around and make sure that it's good for your viewing needs. In terms of the certificate of attendance, if you're looking to access the certificate of attendance, you need about 40 minutes of the presentation to access that. And you can log on at any time you'd like. It's the little yellow widget at the bottom. Please feel free to use the question and answer box as we go. You can type your questions throughout the presentation, and I will compile them for a little bit more of a formal question and answer period at the end with Rick. So please just type those questions as they come, and we'll be happy to get to them if we have the time. Otherwise, please just enjoy the presentation and know that we're here if you need. We wanted to make a quick little note to say that the CSW is, of course, standing in solidarity with all of those who are mourning the death of George Floyd. We have joined in a couple statements, and of course, we want to make sure that everyone on this call today is also understanding the role social workers play in fighting oppression and injustice. So with all that being said, I'm going to pass it over to Rick. Rick, thank you so much for joining us again today. I can't wait for this important conversation we're going to have.
Thank you, everyone, for taking time out of your days and for adding more screen time to it. We all know how well that sitting behind a computer desk is doing for our mental health and well-being. So I will try and make this as enjoyable and informative session as I can for you. As with my past sessions, you will see on the opening slide my email. And by all means, if you have questions down the road or in the future pertaining to what I have to say, I'm more than happy to answer your emails, or God forbid, do another Zoom with you. But I will try and do my best to make this of value, right? And so the first piece, of course, is that fortunately for you, this is an online course. I could have emailed you the PowerPoint deck and you could have read the whole thing in 5 minutes. But I prefer making it a long hour while I read each bullet point in slow motion, P-O-I-N-T. So just to let you know that I can't see any of you, and I will talk as quick as I can to put as much information. This is a summary of a course I do on pharmacology for counselors. In terms of social workers, we've all been trained in this notion of a biopsychosocial assessment. Unfortunately, we really skimp on the bio. Most of us don't have science backgrounds. Most of us didn't like math after grade 10. But in the addiction field, that biological aspect is crucial. It's crucial in understanding behavior in terms of use and in terms of withdrawal. It's important in terms of when people are on a prescribed medication or over-the-counter medication in interaction with a drug. It's important in terms of what drugs will do with psychotropics. So I'll try and do all of that today with you in about an hour's time. So my world of addiction involves psychoactive drugs. And so these are very specific substances that their function is to change the way your brain works. And so I'm a big brain guy in the fact that who we are in essence is all about our brains, is that when we have a trauma, it affects the way our brain functions. When we are born with a genetic issue, it's the way our brain functions. All those elements around the neurotransmitters that all make us unique, but yet which we all have the same of, right? So we're all common as a species having the same type of brain functioning, but how those neurons interact is just a marvel to behold. But then we dump psychoactive drugs in it, and that is the big issue. The other thing that you want to consider on the biological element of being a social worker is that certainly psychoactive drugs change the way we behave and the way we think and the way we feel. But the other part is that it changes the autonomic nervous system. So right now, some of you may have had lunch or eating lunch right now, and so you're not controlling your digestive process. It's just happening. You've got blood pressure, you're breathing. Hopefully you're breathing a little bit better than I am. Some more deep breaths. But again, when you're not consciously thinking about doing breathing exercises, your respiration just goes on. You don't think about that, right? Your blood pressure is going on now. Your cardiovascular system is going on now. All those things are autonomic nervous system functions. Your brain controls that. You don't have a whole lot of conscious control over it. But psychoactive drugs do. So they alter the part of the brain that we can't control, that controls a whole bunch of life functions. And that's what makes them dangerous and distinct from other types of issues we deal with social workers, which intersects us in the realm of medicine and nursing to a greater area than some of the other practice fields we have, is because there's a reason in addiction we put the bio first, right? It's the part that alters our ability to interact with the world around us. And so there are three primary areas of drugs. Depressants, central nervous depressants, which include opioids, and they slow down the central nervous system, slow down the autonomic nervous system. We have stimulants, which speed it up, and then we have hallucinogens, which disrupt the way our brain functions, disrupt the way that sensory input is perceived. So you may be touching a desk, but you may feel like your hands are going through it. And so what a hallucinogen does, which I'll talk about at the end of the presentation, is makes you think and makes you feel and see in your brain different experiences than the physical world presents you. So three distinct experiences by drugs. And this will matter because they will impact upon how your service user will feel and how the medication your service user is taking otherwise will interact with them. So a couple of different elements. What's common and why psychoactive drugs are a big deal is you see neutral. This is your state of homeostasis. This is when you woke up this morning, hopefully had a good 7-8 hours of sleep, had a decent breakfast, more than just coffee and toast. When you're at a balanced level, homeostasis. What psychoactive drugs do is by slowing down or speeding up our brain, they produce this sense of euphoria, right? And so we are obviously very social animals, and we take in social input, we take in social messages, often unconscious to us, but just our environment gives us all these ideas that frame our behavior. And as social workers, we're aware of that. But what happens when you drop a psychoactive drug in there is that higher order thinking, right? Those higher order cognitive processes, they're the ones that are initially affected. And why they're affected? We get a sense of euphoria, right? Our brain isn't working so hard. Our natural fight-flight response is impacted a little bit, and we feel more calm, more relaxed. Right? The natural resting state of human beings is one of anxiety. You take a psychoactive drug, it impacts that self-preservation feeling, and you feel euphoric. So we're going to start by going down the scale. And if you went to university like I did, you would see this in your university bar in any sort of Friday, Saturday, sometimes Thursday night, motion from euphoria to relaxation to sedation to drowsiness to stupor and consciousness, and then coma and death. The biggest issue I have as a drug educator is I never want to be a death educator. I don't want to talk about the fact that drugs cause death. They do. It is a risk with excessive amounts, but it is all these other behaviors that lead to the family disruption, that lead to involvement with child welfare, that lead to criminal justice issues. It's not this bottom line that we're concerned about when there's an opioid crisis, but all these other elements that you'll see in your practice. Around the midpoint time, I'll talk about stimulants, and I'll flip back the slide. But again, euphoria, excitement, agitation, it's the opposite process. And again, death being a potential outcome. So this is a basic physics experiment. When you take a depressant, active use takes you this way. When the drug has left your system, the withdrawal, the rebound is in this direction until you return to a state of homeostasis. Similarly, when you take a stimulant, you go up the scale, and then when the drug has been eliminated, the withdrawal, the hangover effect, if you will, is to bring you back down this way to your body moves to homeostasis. Again, your body loves you. It's always moving you to a state of balance, regardless of what you're putting into your system. So I want to talk about momentarily, my screen has not moved, but hopefully you're on the screen that says drug groupings. Here we go.
Do you want drug groupings, Rick?
Actually, I want the next one, and my screen has stopped moving out.
That's okay. I'm on depressants. Is that the one you're looking for?
Perfect, yeah. Yeah.
Perfect.
So, thanks. So we want to think about the fact that as a species, we've been around for millennia, and that the biggest change for us has been the invention of the light bulb about 200 years ago. Think about when we moved from daylight savings time to back and forth to regular standard time. And what happens, that first Monday, people are cranky, they have a hard time adjusting, we don't sleep well. That's a 1 hour shift. So a couple hundred years ago, we went from a moon-sun cycle to this 24-hour-a-day cycle. And what ended up happening is that there was a huge movement of individuals from agrarian life to industrial life and huge numbers of industrial accidents. And that was basically the sleep cycle was disrupted. And so what happened, of course, is we created drugs to help us go to sleep. And these were the barbiturates. Sedative hypnotics is a group that contains barbiturates. Phenobarbital being a classic example, non-barbiturate sedative hypnotics, and benzodiazepines. And we have changed over the course of the late 19th century, early 20th century to the middle of the 20th century, walking through these substances. They all belong to a larger family, and their job is to slow the central nervous system down, slow your behavior down, right? And so here are a group of barbiturates. Today, in terms of practice, you won't see a whole lot of these anymore. They're used primarily in hospital settings when there is severe trauma. But again, back in the beginning of the 20th century, they were used to help people go to sleep, help people deal with their anxiety. We didn't really understand how the brain would work. And so we would have serious trauma issues. During World War II, there'd be a knock on the door, and they would present to a family that their typically son had died in battle. And that was quite a traumatic experience for the family. And certainly these drugs were then marketed to help, again, primarily women, go to sleep, deal with their anxiety, deal with their coping. The war ended, and they'd been now spent 34 years developing and promoting these drugs, and suddenly they thought, what are we going to do with these drugs? So this is an article, or sorry, advertisement from a medical journal of the 1950s, where they're now using this family of drugs to promote coping. And what is coping? Coping is dealing with your child. So the history of depressants in North America has been to help people go to sleep and wake up, deal with their anxiety in a chemical manner. But if you're anxious and you're having sleep issues and you take the drug and you stop taking the drug, remember the rebound effect. Rebound effect is when you stop taking the drug, your anxiety will actually, in the short term, be increased. Your insomnia will be increased. And so now we've got this history of about 40, 50 years, the start of the last century, of medicating issues of coping. Didn't have the knowledge about sleep hygiene, didn't have the knowledge about brain. We didn't do things like meditation, mindfulness, right? Instead, we have medicine. We have the bio piece that is very effective because these drugs work quickly. Within half an hour of taking them, you will be drowsy. Within 45 minutes of taking them, you will be less anxious. But there's a cost because your body is always moving back to that place of homeostasis. And so what happens is that we continue to move forward, and we now start marketing it. And again, I've been married for 34 years. I love my wife immeasurably. We have 2 wonderful children. But on her wedding day, she did not look this good. This woman's just got out of bed. She has just taken a barbiturate, Placidil, very powerful setup, hypnotic agent, and she is ready to face the day. This is, of course, is not what happened. After taking this drug for 3 to 4 weeks, we see physical changes. The drug starts to actually change your homeostatic balance point. You become more and more necessary to take the drug. It is that sense of physical dependency that begins. So we're marketing it this way to control your life and put it together, whereas the physical aspect of the drug is one that changes the ability to interact and actually physically becomes dependent, such that when you don't take the drug, you're physically ill. So again, this is the same family of drugs that alcohol belongs to as well, doing the same sorts of things. What we found, however, is that when you mix members of this family of drugs, right? Let me just throw you back here. So when you look at all these depressant drugs, they have a cumulative effect. So when you are taking a barbiturate and you're drinking alcohol, you had an effect such that 1 + 1 = 3. Old pharmacology, old technology, old medicine. What wasn't realized is when you mix these 2 drugs, that the lethal dose level, so every psychoactive drug has an LD50. This is the amount of drug that you take that will overwhelm an individual. Did I say individual? I didn't mean individual. I mean a 5'10", 180-pound male. So up until the point in time that you were about, 15, 16, 17, those of you who have children and your children got sick when they were younger, right? They'd take your child, you take the doctor, they would weigh the baby, right? They'd weigh the baby. The baby weighs, 8 pounds, you give them so much medicine. The baby weighs 24 pounds, the baby weighs 56 pounds. No, baby's an adolescent now. Give them different amounts of medicine. Suddenly, we turn 18 or we turn 16, and we're giving a 5'2", 120-pound woman the same amount of medication we're giving a 6'2", 220-pound person medication. And so the other thing you want to think about with all your service users is the medication they're being given is the GP or the psychiatrist taking consideration sex and weight, because we tend to over-medicate women, particularly smaller women and older women whose liver function has decreased, and we tend to under-medicate larger men. And again, that might fit in some of the pattern of behavior we see. So to that point is when you mix any of these drugs with alcohol, you have a 1 + 1 = 3 effect. That's the phenomenon. And so back in the days of barbiturates, the LD50 is very low. It only takes about 10 or 12 barbiturates taken at once to cause an overdose. And so you take your regular dose of barbiturate with a couple glasses of wine, a couple beers, a couple shots, and you put yourself at risk. And the risk was an overdose and death from stopping the cardiovascular system or a lack of respiration. So even pharmaceutical companies don't like being sued and losing money. So, you must learn to cope with your adult problems like an adult. Do you mean I can take tranquilizers? So what they did, they came up with a different type of hypnotic. And these were our benzodiazepines, our Valiums, our Xanax, our Libriums. And in terms of pharmacology, they were far, far superior. The risk of death by respiration went from 10 or 12 pills to literally dozens, if not hundreds. However, the overall impact didn't change. If you mix it with a glass of wine, 1 + 1 = 3, you become more impaired. That puts you at risk for not just driving, it puts you at risk for sexual assault, trauma, put yourself in high-risk situations. sexually transmitted diseases. And we saw this very much in the bar scenes at the end of this century, was a mixing of these drugs. Rufinol was a member of this family of drugs, so mixing of two of them, having individuals being taken advantage of because of the drug pharmacology. So the other thing you want to do when you're doing your assessments of your service users is, what are their prescription medications? Like, what are they taking already being prescribed? And then what are their over-the-counter medications? Because the other little thing you should know about these wonderful drugs called antihistamines. Like, I've got allergies. I take the Claritins right now. But there are a variety of different categories of antihistamines. The older ones and the newer ones. Newer ones, the Saldanes, the Hisminols, the Claritins, these have very little psychoactive effect. The older ones and the Gravols, these still do. These still make you drowsy. And so the other issue here is that, again, mixing this with alcohol or taking antihistamine over the counter with a prescribed benzodiazepine can cause additional impairment, which in turn affects behavior, which in turn affects judgment. So you've got this interactive effect. And goodness knows, if you're having a Xanax and you're taking some Gravol because you're traveling, you're upset stomach, and you have a couple of drinks before, well, when we could travel, before you hit the train or the plane, then there was certainly issues of memory loss, memory blackout. The other element, for those of you who are working with seniors, is that antihistamines are a neurotransmitter. They send messages in the brain. And we know that, again, for seniors, for older citizens who have prolonged use, so I'm talking about chronic use, I'm not talking about allergy use or a couple weeks here or there, but individuals who take these for a period of months, there is a linkage to dementia-like symptoms. So not producing dementia, but producing that forgetfulness, leading to issues with coordination. And so certainly if someone's been on an antihistamine for a long period of time with never stopping it, you certainly want to ask about why they're on this drug and how it's impacting the behavior. Because we know if we remove the antihistamine and add something that's newer generation from old generation, that those dementia-like symptoms will disappear. They will disappear. In terms of the most problematic member of this family of drugs is solvents. We are relatively fortunate in Canada. Our solvent abuse is limited to just Indigenous young people and just urban youth and just high-risk individuals. We're lucky about this. You move into some nations in Asia and South America, it's prominent among young people to a far greater extent. If you work from a harm reduction perspective, literally any drug other than this one. We joke about alcohol and brain cells, right? You drink enough alcohol, you're going to burn some brain, and you do. You burn some brain cells, but you've got billions of brain cells. So don't worry about a couple hundred. You probably didn't need them. They're probably from your undergraduate communication lecture anyway. Not important. These drugs, however, this is serious, right? This is ethanol. This is glue. Have you ever crazy glued your fingers together? You know what? What's it like separating that crazy glue? Ethanol. You pour ethanol into your car. The gasolines that I buy, because I can't afford good gasoline, right? 10% ethanol. It's what powers our vehicles. When you inhale these substances, right? When you inhale glue, when you inhale gasoline, when you inhale nail polish remover, when you inhale large amounts of nitrous oxide, it literally burns holes in the side of your brain. When you have a young adolescent brain, that brain damage is not recoverable. So abstinence with teenagers, much more difficult than older people once brain development is complete. But certainly you want to consider, if you have a solvent user, a glue sniffer, literally any other substance, is a safer option for them to be using. The caveat is those individuals with family histories of psychosis or schizophrenia, and there again, cannabis becomes a large risk as well. I want to talk about that later on a little bit. But certainly, this is the single most problematic substance we have. It's when there's no regulations and no controls on this country to when anyone can access. And again, the reason the war on drugs is outright stupid is that if I can't get my cocaine or my methamphetamine, is I just go next door, I pop your gas tank, and I siphon a little gasoline out of it, and I've got a really decent drug that will create my sense of euphoria, mask my physical and my psychological pain quite nicely and cost me nothing. We ain't pregnant, we ain't gonna drive no cars, and we ain't gonna operate no machinery, are we? If the situation was different today, my opening slide is not a picture of the issues of white silence being violence. Rather, it's a picture of an aquarium. And the point there is, I ask you during this presentation is, are you a fish that sees the water you swim in? When I say, let's go for a drink, you know right away, I mean, we're going for a glass of wine or a beer, right? We're going out. I mean, that statement, that idiom is so prominent in English that's associated with alcohol. Not fruit juice, not a coffee. Let's go for a drink means we're doing this. We send from the time of a very young age a much different message around alcohol. Simply put, from a biological perspective, we had to breed rats to drink alcohol because rats in their natural habitat won't drink alcohol. When you think about your first alcoholic beverage, your first real one, not a Bahama Mama and not a fancy pink lady, something like that, but a real Orion Coke that's Coke's in there to hide the flavor, but a straight up drink, you would have hopefully gagged on it because your senses, particularly the taste buds in your mouth and your throat, say, hey, human being, this is poison, spit it out. And so those of you who consume alcohol, think back to your first beer. Think back to that first drink when if you're from Hamilton, 13, 14, if you're from other parts of the country, 18, 19. Think about that first drink and what it actually was and how you had to force it down, right? We are socially constructed to consume. This is why they age wines with lavender and with different fragrance and cherries, all these fruits. It is to take away the action notes of ethanol, right, being problematic. So I took this next slide several years ago. It's one of my favorite ones. Go ahead, drink and drive. There's a jail, there's a hospital, there's a morgue. It was in the United States. I quite like this one. This one, next one, I didn't take. Someone sent it to me. They said this is what happens around universities. And this is the whole notion, right, is that there's a whole humor around alcohol. There's a whole different construction around the consumption of this drug. I just want to do one little exercise with you. Again, this goes back to the point about how we over and under medicate adults in our society. This is a standard drink. So again, if you're consuming alcohol, and again, not tell you not to on the weekends coming up where you're done listening to me, by all means, but 1 glass of wine. So a 5-ounce, 12% alcohol content glass of wine is equivalent to a 12-ounce, 5% alcohol beer, is equivalent to 1.5 ounces of 40% of spirit, right? Spirit, and again, interesting word, spirit. Think about it, if you're Catholic, Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, right? That notion of alcohol and religion and all the same, standard drink. Hope you can see this. Not, please blow it up afterwards. A wonderful study was done in Australia several years ago among Australian male, right? Male's important because you want consistent biology, male bus drivers. Why Australia? Pretty darn good drinkers in terms of quality. Why bus drivers? Because they are skilled drivers. That's their vocation, and they drive large vehicles, and they need to have safety. And Australian bus drivers had a very good safety record. And so they gave them alcohol. And they found out that at 0.02, or my chart 20, but 0.02, this is a point in time where actual impairment of physical functioning occurs. At 0.02 is when they could no longer drive and react to stimuli, someone running across the street from them, an object being thrown in front of the bus. In terms of reaction time, that's when it became impaired. And so in Canada, we have 0.05 and 0.080 as the issues. 0.02 for your well-being, for your children's well-being, for your grandchildren's well-being. It literally is that low when your reaction time begins to falter. The reason I tell you, and again, this is exactly what you don't do in PowerPoint slides, is put something up like this. Again, print this off, blow it up. This is really important. It shows you the difference between men and women and alcohol consumption. I have a very long story I typically tell here, but I won't tell it now, is I was at a family event where I didn't want to be at because I should have been somewhere else, and I wasn't having fun, and it was an open bar. And so in the course of 1 hour, I consumed 6 standard drinks. And so at that point in time, I was I'm a male, so I'm on the bottom of the chart. I was about 175 pounds. And in 6 hours, my blood alcohol reading was 0.15. So just to compare, right, if you are a 150-pound woman, it takes you about 4.5 drinks to get to where I am at 6 drinks. If you're a 125-pound woman, it takes you about 3.5 drinks, not almost 4 drinks, to get to where I am at 6 drinks. So that gives you a bit of an idea of the amount of drug that you consume, the difference male and females have. The other important point of my story was that, so from 5 to 6 o'clock, I had 6 drinks. My blood alcohol level is 0.15. The rate of which alcohol is eliminated is pretty consistent across men and women, across different ethnic groups, is about 0.015. So it would have taken me 10 hours. So I'm at an event. I drink for 1 hour. I drink heavily, but for 1 hour. I end at 6 p.m., which means I am not at 0.0 alcohol to 4 a.m. I'm actually not safe to drive using the actual biological scale until 3 a.m. So certainly this is why we have service users who leave a bar at 2 o'clock, go to sleep for a few hours, get to go to work for 7 at 6, and are arrested for impaired driving because the alcohol has not sufficiently cleared their system. The other thing I want to point out, though, is that there's a wonderful scene in Indiana Jones, I think the second one, where the female hero is drinking drink for drink with this bunch of big Mongols in a bar. And she's drink for drink, and she drinks them all under the table, right? And so there's another example of Pulp Fiction. Because if my lovely partner, at that point in time, had 6 drinks with me, her blood alcohol level would have been 0.244. And so while it takes me 10 hours to reach a point of sobriety of 0, it would have taken her nearly 10 hours just to get to my spot. So for her to drink this level, right, it would have been nearly 2/3 of a day for the alcohol to clear her system. So again, male and female matters. Weight matters. And this example is very easy to show with alcohol, but it goes across all drug categories. In case you're wondering, the best metaphor I have for this is your body is a piece of wood and alcohol is sandpaper. And if you ever work with wood, you know if you're sanding wood, is that there's soft spots in wood. Sometimes you go, oh, you have to sand around it or work around that particular piece. So if you want to think of your body and your service users' bodies as a piece of wood and the alcohol you consume, and again, not a drink once a week, I'm talking about ongoing chronic use of alcohol, it just wears down the body. Ultimately, if you drink long enough, it affects all the body parts, but all of us have inherent weaknesses. And this is where you'll see that first impact of sanding on the body is that it might affect cardiovascular, it might affect the way your skin looks, and we know people who have the ruddy noses and ruddy complexions. It may affect the pancreas, obviously liver functioning. Ultimately, all of these are affected by chronic alcohol use because it's a natural poison to the body. Right? There is no therapeutic utility for alcohol other than sand sanitizer. There is a separate group of depressants called opioids. Oops, there we go. Opioids, like the drugs we just talked about, slow down the central nervous system. The biggest difference with these is that they affect also the perception of pain. And of course, we know right now we have a epidemic of opioid use. We have always had opioid use in this country. It has existed for long periods of time. Right? So here's an ad from the end of the 19th century where heroin was sold over the counter in pharmacies. The lists of opioids that are available to us is extensive. There are literally dozens and dozens of opioids. Now, we've tended to focus on heroin, which is one of the few legal opioids globally. And of course, fentanyl crisis is a big deal. The interesting thing you might want to know about fentanyl, though, is that it's one of the drugs that's given to people who have COVID-19 that need to be intubated and need to be put on ventilators. It's one of the drugs that's given to them to relax their bodies and mask the pain of having a big tube shoved down your throat, because that's something foreign to the human body. So opioids are a wonderful classification of drugs. We have in our bodies something called endorphins. These are natural pain maskers. So if you bang your fist or cut your hand, right, there's a pain sensation, right? Your pain occurs at the site of the injury, but the pain is perceived also in the brain. And so we have a moderate level of endorphin such that minor pain, like a cut, right, some bruising, you feel it, you see it, you try and protect that area for a day or two, but you can go on with your life. The reason we don't evolutionary-wise have large amounts of endorphins is when you break your leg, you want to know you can't walk and to rest that leg until it heals. So pain is very functional. Physical pain is very functional for us in our survival. And so opioids are outstanding at masking physical pain. The pain is still there. So if you've got a broken leg and you're taking some codeine for it, you know what? You don't feel the pain. You tap your leg, you're going to feel the pain. The pain still exists. All these drugs do is mask it. Opioids don't heal a thing. Your body heals itself. But these opioids mask the perception of pain while that healing process is occurring. What distinguishes opioids from everything else and where it becomes a problem is it also masks emotional pain. And certainly individuals who have had trauma, physical trauma, but physical trauma produced by an emotional response, be it a critical incident, be it violence, be it an issue of abuse in the household, any of those emotional pains, is that because, like all the other depressants, euphoria is created, right? Euphoria is created, is that you're not just blocking the physical pain, it's an emotional pain. And certainly the vast majority of individuals in our society who go to hospital or given an opioid never become physically dependent. So please don't have a concern about opioids being used for physical pain. They have been used literally for centuries, all the way back to the Mideast and ancient Islamic doctors back in the Middle East used it to treat people back when they were cultivating opium poppies. So a long, long history of this, of good use. But we have issues when it's used for emotional pain or when used chronically, right? This is for acute pain. It's also for people who are palliatively ill or have severe chronic issues. But it's this where the problems occur. Secondary effects, it suppresses the cough reflex as an antidiarrheal agent. The risks become, there we go, oops, the risks become around the autonomic nervous system. So the opioids affect an old part of the brain stem that controls your breathing, and that certainly is where we see a lot of overdose deaths. The other issue we have is with nausea and vomiting, and with opioids, and also to an extent with alcohol. If you consume too much alcohol, it relaxes the muscles that are necessary for vomiting. Your body says, hang on a second, you've poisoned yourself. This is not good. I'm going to help you. I'm going to remove the poison from the body, from the stomach, for vomiting. But the muscles are so relaxed in your chest, you don't have the capacity to finish the behavior. And so we see individuals who then aspirate based on this element. Depresses heart functioning and produces physical and psychological dependency. And so certainly from a harm reduction viewpoint, the use of methadone and Suboxone are wonderful alternatives. They have great utility. When you go forward in your practice, and at some point in time you want to consider methadone maintenance versus methadone treatment. Methadone maintenance is a program where someone who has become dependent upon opioid, codeine, Oxycontin, oxycodone, Mempridol, any of these drugs, is then put on, morphine, is put on methadone or Suboxone, and they get medical support, and that's what they get. And so now you're on a lifetime of this drug. You can function, you can behave in society quite nicely, so the argument becomes an agent of social control. You can hold a job, you can maintain a relationship. These drugs have great utility. but they meet all the criteria of the definition of an addicting drug. And so if you don't have your drug for one day, you go into horrible withdrawal. And when the issues of withdrawal from these drugs is excruciating pain. I used to tell a story, and I was told, Rick, you're not explicit enough. Please describe the withdrawal from chronic opioid use as bone cancer, pain from the inside out. And the irony, of course, is that these are the drugs that you're using to mask that pain. And so when you've been using this to mask that pain, what you get is a huge upsurge of pain. And now if you're using it for psychological pain, boom, you've got both issues. So again, the question becomes methadone maintenance, and then there's methadone or Suboxone treatment, where you stabilize the drug use. And during that period of stabilization, we come into play. The counseling. What are the issues that led to the drug use? What are the social living conditions you find yourself in? Can we do anything about that? We can. Fantastic. Let us stabilize you, deal with some of the psychosocial issues, and let's reduce, not eliminate, reduce the amount of methadone you're on. Stabilize again. And that period of stabilization can be 3 months, 4 months, 6 months. This is not a process of weaning in 6 weeks. This is stabilize, deal with psychosocial issues, reduce, deal with the cravings and the triggers of the substance use, deal with those, stabilize, reduce. And so my method is a 2 to 3 year gradual withdrawal, dealing with the biological issues of craving as they occur, dealing with the psychosocial issues that led to the drug use, and moving to a different friendship network, a different social support network, a different social environment, a different way of coping. And so that's methadone or Suboxone treatment. You'll hear the term methadone maintenance treatment, MMT, and social workers challenge that. Are you actually treating these people, or are you just going to give them drugs for the next 40 years of their life? Which is cool until you turn 60 and need your pancreas taken out. And what are we going to do for pain? Because you've already been on a huge pain masker. There are tons and tons of stimulants. They don't group nicely the way the depressants and opioids do. Cocaine and amphetamines are the most product members of the family. And you'll see, again, here's a lovely ad for cocaine tooth drops. You used to be able to buy everything in the drugstore. Drugstores were way better in the 19th century. We have issues with Ritalin and Concerta, which are related to amphetamines. Right? The anorexia and decongestants, we don't see this a whole lot, but decongestants. Antihistamines are central nervous system depressants that slow the brain down. Decongestants that fight colds are central nervous system stimulants that increase brain functioning, right? They're opposites. When you take a cold medication, you'll often see both an antihistamine and a decongestant in there. The antihistamine is basically to help you fall asleep at night. So when you have the daytime, nighttime things, have a look at the side of the labels, and you'll see the nighttime version has antihistamine, while the daytime just have the decongestant. Khat is an example of Canadian drug policy being racist. It was illegal until about 1979 in this country. Then we had a huge influx of Somalis due to the situation in their part of the world and the war that was going on, and the famine that was happening. And as soon as we had a larger Somali population, the government of Canada banned Khat, or Khat, depending on which way you enunciate it, as a drug. It has been used in that part of the world, which would be Yemen and Somalia and Kenya and Eritrea, that part of the globe, Sudan, for centuries, the way we've used alcohol. Actually, that's not true. It's closer to how we use chewing tobacco, if that's a fairish or better. Bath salts are something that were a problem for a while. They still exist in the market. They're not bath salts. They're this fancy drug name right there, $5 if you pronounce it. But what they are is that they're a chemical derivative of Khat. They just synthesize this. The way coca was used for centuries in South America, and we synthesized it, made cocaine, made it much more powerful. The same thing happened here in the end of the 20th century. We took a drug been around a long time, synthesized it, and because this hadn't been banned, and we typically ban drugs in North America by doing their chemical formula, there was a large underground market for a while, and it was a very potent amphetamine-like drug. Betel, most of you aren't familiar with Betel, is the fourth most used psychoactive drug on the planet. It is very common to the subcontinent, Asian populations, when you get to Myanmar, Indonesia, that part of the world, that Indonesian nations use betel. It's used for a couple of reasons. It's cheap, it's a plant, it grows readily, and it's an appetite suppressant. And so people on working people making minimum amounts of money can chew this all day long, and it'll help them fight their hunger. We don't see a whole lot of it in North America. If you live in the Toronto and Hamilton areas, if you go into the farmer's market, you'll more than likely find someone selling betel. You'll see when they chew it, it turns their mouth red. Then we got nicotine and caffeine. The slides I'll leave behind if you want to look at them later on. We'll have some notes on caffeine. But just to let you know, nicotine is generally not considered a drug in our society. It is the #1 cause of premature death on the planet. Woodstock, Ontario has 30,000 people living there, give or take, and that's the number of people that will die from tobacco-related causes this year. We'll lose an entire community of 30,000 people in terms of premature death. The difficulty, of course, with nicotine is that, awesome ad from the 60s, is that it takes a while, right? It takes a while for it to die. And so you're not dying like opioids in their 20s and 30s. You're not being rushed to the hospital with palpitations of the heart from cocaine, amphetamines in your 20s or 30s. You're dying at 58, 64, maybe 72. Not a big deal, especially if you're 15 years old. And we had done an awesome job with nicotine in this country until vaping, right? And so vaping has become a big deal. So I'm just going to do a quick overview of these drugs in the next 10 minutes or so, but I want to talk about vaping when I get to nicotine. So certainly cocaine has all sorts of problems with it. If you note the cocaine illness chart compared to tobacco, compared to the alcohol one, not even close. Alcohol actually produces far more physical harm than cocaine. I'm not saying cocaine's good for you. I'm not saying it's safe. I'm not saying there's cartels making billions of dollars off this even during the pandemic. I'm just saying in comparison is that cocaine produces all sorts of physical harm, all sorts of societal harm. But on a scale, alcohol actually produces more physical and more social harm to our society right now. Where cocaine got its rap was in dependency liability testing. What's dependency liability testing, Rick? I'm a social worker. I don't care. Is when you put a rat in a cage and train to do things. So I am a psych major, so I actually didn't have rats, I had pigeons. And we trained our animals to press levers for water, press levers for food, turn in circles right, turn in circle left. We trained them, no different than you'll see an animal trained at like Marine Land in a park. We take cognizant mammals and we train them by feeding them. We also train them by keeping them constantly hungry. So they will react when you give them an option for food. So we take this scenario, instead of food or water, we give animals drugs. And so we give them all sorts of drugs. And so we give them different options of drugs. We give them heroin, we give them cocaine, we give them alcohol. Remember, rats won't drink alcohol, and see what happens. And so where cocaine got its reputation as the most problematic of all psychoactive drugs was in these lab rat experiments, which also work with higher order mammals all the way up to monkeys. What you would find is that you train a rat, right, to press for water, press for food, and then you extinguish the behavior. So you have to hit the lever 5 times when the red light is on, you get some food. 10 times when the blue light is on, you get water. And then you extinguish the behavior. You put the red light on and you push and nothing happens. And after a while, the rat learns. The rat's smart, doesn't push anymore when the red light's on. No reward. I'm not getting anything back. Why should I engage in this behavior? What they found out is when they used cocaine is that the rats would push until exhaustion. And so they would train them to have cocaine, 20 pushes of the lever with both paws, grab cocaine, and they do that, and they come used to doing that over and over again, but then no more cocaine. And they literally would push to a state of exhaustion. You expand the experiment. You give them the option of water, food, and cocaine. Water would be available, food would be available, cocaine would be extinguished, and the rat would still continue to push at the cocaine lever. And so this is what led to the notion of cocaine being the number one most dependency liability, the one that produces the greatest physical dependency and craving of all the drugs. And it is. It's a very powerful drug. This, along with crystal methamphetamine, have the greatest release of dopamine in the brain. There is no behavior that you or I can do as human beings, eating, amusement park rides, thrill rides, sex. There's nothing that we can do that releases as much dopamine as cocaine or methamphetamine, crystal methamphetamine. And therefore, this is an overriding reward mechanism in our brain. You add to it crack and crystal meth. The difference being is that those, of course, are the smokable variants of the drug. When you smoke the substance, it gets to your brain faster than any mechanism, faster than an IV injection. But again, we're back to basic physics. The faster in, the faster out. So now you've got a drug that gets to your brain really fast, releases a massive amount of dopamine, make you feel like you're Leonardo DiCaprio in Titanic, king of the world, right? You're on top of the universe. Nothing is more powerful. And boom, it's gone. The drug is gone, followed by the crash, right? Because your body, you can't cheat your body. So now you're in withdrawal, you're crashing down. And so as good as you felt, because your body always moves to homeostasis as fast as it can. So as good as you felt, you're feeling worse even faster. And you go, ho, none of this. And so you smoke a little crack, smoke a little crystal meth, and boom, you're on top of the world. The difficulty becomes is after a while is that you can only produce so much dopamine. And your body becomes physically dependent, and you're at this state. And so there are some research, some studies that say that you can literally burn out your dopamine, ability to produce enough dopamine to behave, quote unquote, normally, which is homeostasis, not normal, at a homeostatic level. So then we end up with individuals at a level called adhedonia. Adhedonia is the inability to feel pleasure. So you'll find some, and it's more in crystal meth users, unfortunately, but certainly in chronic cocaine users, they'll have used so much drug for so long that they can't get back to a state of feeling homeostatic, feeling normal. And so those individuals, we end up having to do things like put them on antidepressants, serotonin, or enhancers to bring them back just to function. So certainly a high-risk group. I currently have a study on hold because of COVID looking at dealing with crystal methamphetamine. It is the underground secret drug in Canada. It, again, is causing a huge amount of issues in hospitals. Those of you who work in direct service, you know if you've got a crystal meth user, they can't stay focused. They're very distracted. Their life becomes all about the drug and only the drug. There aren't a lot of alternative behaviors we can provide for them. And so we are looking at a project in London, Ontario, to see if we can start treating them in a harm reduction model to decrease use, provide alternatives on a hospital basis as opposed to the community to take away some of that initial community risk factors. So certainly very prominent drugs, very problematic drugs. If you have a general social work practice, you're more likely to see, again, my apologies, I've got a little bit of drag on mine. Issues with Ritalin. Ritalin is this, by the way, is what's on your screen anyway, is an ad from the World War II when we actually gave our pilots all sorts of drugs, including amphetamines, to keep them in the air. Some of the physical withdrawal effects from cocaine and from amphetamines and methamphetamine. I put this up because more of you are likely to have a child involved with Ritalin. Ritalin is a wonderful, and Concerta are wonderful substances for properly assessed individuals. They belong to the stimulant family of drugs. And so you need to consider about the paradoxical effect. You've got a child that is already hyperactive, and you're giving them a drug that's a stimulant. So the question becomes, what does that cause that behavior? And certainly ADHD is a legitimate diagnosis. It occurs in 3 to 5% of the population, according to current prevalence stats. We've also seen more than a 100% increase in those prescriptions from 1990 to 2010. I don't have any data from the last decade, so I can't tell you what's happened in the last 10 years. But certainly in terms of using Ritalin, it is psychoactive. It does change brain functioning. It can produce a physical dependency if the individual does not have a biological reason for using it. So if you don't have enough dopamine in your system and we give you Ritalin, yep, it'll bring you up to a homeostatic level so you can function with your peers. But of course, those of you who work in the area know you want to discount everything else. You want to discount it's not fetal alcohol effects. You want to discount it's not an issue of household trauma. You want to make sure it's not child number 5 in a chaotic family. You also want to consider where the child was born the birth year, because we know that children born at the end of the quarter, right, born October, November, December, fall behind their peers who are born in January, February, March. So is it a birth order issue? Is it where you're born the calendar year? You want to discount all of these factors because it's a stimulant. And there's a relationship between giving children a stimulant who don't need it and their use of cocaine and amphetamines in adulthood. But there's also the risk, which our assessment skills are important, but also the risk of not properly medicating children who do have ADHD, and then when they get their hands on cocaine or amphetamines, they will use it because they actually did have a biological deficit. So this is a psychosocial issue, is a family issue, is a birth order or birth year issue, or is it biological? That's what your role as a social worker is in this assessment process. Just one slide on nicotine to reinforce what I spoke about earlier. I'll wait for my slides to catch up. Again, you want to compare the effects of smoking to that of cocaine to that of alcohol. It's not good for you. And this is reinforcing my comment earlier about overall death and overall problematic. This is an old slide from 1989. This is the height of, still AIDS, right? It wasn't HIV. This is the height of the number of individuals who are dying from HIV in the province of Ontario, provincial stats. And so you notice the difference between HIV deaths, suicides, traffic accidents, large part being alcohol, of course, compared to deaths from smoking. So there simply is no comparison. Well, cartoon, the real reason dinosaurs became extinct, not to have a view on tobacco. And again, later on, if you want to go to the slide deck, I have a slide here for you looking at the effects of caffeine, your caffeine consumption. Again, you'll see this notion here, 5 to 7 glasses of coffee a day, cups of coffee a day. Tea's got a little bit less caffeine. But again, the 5 would be women, the 7 would be men. It's this level, if you're at 5 to 7 cups of coffee a day, you're now physically dependent. Your body has become used to having this drug in your system. This is going to change. We're on the cusp of huge changes. There is a current war going on in the United States. The current war on drugs began back in 1968, and there's parallels to what's going on now. Part of the reason for the war on drugs that Nixon launched on the United States and on the world was for him to fight 2 movements. One was the civil rights movement, and the second was the peace movement. There is now, we knew this for a while, there's now a transcript out, there's now books out, there's now all sorts of dialogue and transcriptions from that era indicating that the war on drugs was a sham to divert attention from the presidency. Parallels never go away. What's going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years, the research is out there. We are seeing that drugs like LSD and psilocybin are being used for individuals who have depression, treatment-resistant depression, so existing drugs don't work. We're seeing that there is usefulness in people who are palliatively ill. So they are dying, they're close to death, and there's a huge anxiety that for people as they come to end of life expectancies, depending on their spiritual strength, their faith beliefs, there's different responses. What happens, and I'm going to be now totally clinical, I've been called a reductionist, so excuse me for being a reductionist. What happens when you take these drugs is you get a massive burst of serotonin, a huge burst of serotonin. But again, the average person doesn't care. The average person getting large, and not the antidepressants, like the Paxils and Prozacs, not little baby amounts of serotonin that are, maybe don't work, massive amounts of serotonin released. And what happens is you literally have a reframing of the brain. What I mean by that is because these drugs, hallucinogens, create false perceptions. So you're not linked to the physical world around you. You're not linked to the senses of touching and smelling and tasting. You literally do retreat into your own brain. Serotonin explodes. And for the majority of individuals, it is a positive experience. For some individuals, there's no experience whatsoever. For a minority of individuals, and it ranges from study to study what that ratio is, but typically is more than half the individuals have a positive experience. So if you are near the end of your life and you are fearful of death, what death entails, of the pain of death, we've seen giving these drugs to individuals gives them a different sense of relief. These drugs in their natural state have been used for centuries by indigenous peoples, for spirit walking, for communing with their higher powers and their spiritual belief systems. And so we see the similar thing in North American and Western society is that individuals, not all again, but again, a good number in these small studies, these individuals get a different sense of peace. We have seen studies with MDMA. This is ecstasy, a very problematic drug because there's some guy in his basement mixing chemicals together and handing things out. And sometimes it gives you MDMA, which is all right. Sometimes it gives you PMA, and PMA, which is paramethamphetamine, so hallucinogen, will have a far greater propensity to shut down your breathing and overdose you. This, it depends on the batch, but the chemist gets the chemical wrong, he dies. So whenever you see a large number of deaths to a hallucinogen, it's usually because the chemist has mixed a bad batch and he ends up making something else by mistake. But we now have studies with controlled amounts of MDMA, of ecstasy, given to individuals with PTSD. They do better. But guess when they do even better? And again, these are small clinical trials. They're posted on a website called MAP, M-A-P. They've been publishing or summarizing all the data on the websites. What we do find is that using ecstasy in the limited quantities, I'm not talking every day, small quantities, in conjunction with, guess what, my friends, counseling allows people to be more receptive, to have some of the anxiety mitigated, boost the serotonin, and we see outcomes. Ketamine had a real bad rap for the longest time, called Special K, was used as a date rape drug, was used as a very powerful anesthetic, is a very powerful anesthetic. Interestingly, it is on the World Health Organization's list of top 10 drugs for developing countries because it works quickly as an anesthetic agent without harming the lungs and can be used in sort of medical settings in developing nations where there aren't a lot of IV setups and respirators, obviously, and anesthesiologists available. It's a wonderful drug. We've also seen now that because it works on the brain in a different way than opioids and antidepressants, that it has an antidepressant effect. So these substances are going to be huge in terms of psychopharmacology next 5 to 10 years. If you got some money in the pandemic left over and you see a pharmaceutical company and you want to buy some penny stock, I recommend buying some penny stock in some of these, just like you should have bought cannabis a few years back. Again, you can blow this up for yourself. This is a study from 1954. It's a study from an organization called the CIA. You may have heard of them. The CIA was experimenting with LSD back in the 1950s, Korean War, to use as an agent to make the enemy combatants unable to fight. The goal was to make this into an aerosol, spray it on enemy troops, and make them so disconnected from their environments that they couldn't fight. The problem was it didn't work very well as an aerosol. And when you drop an aerosol on someone, it tends to flow back under your own troops. So that was a bit of an issue as well, too. So when all the cool hippies are hanging around the 60s going, oh, LSD, I mean, the American military complex knew about it decades before it became part of the cultural shift in that country. The difference within these hallucinogens is that they do not produce a physical dependency. They produce a physical change. They produce hallucinations. These groups, mescaline-like groups, will speed up the central nervous system. PCP, ketamine, and salvia-divinorum. And the reason it's on there, someone asked me about Miley Cyrus one day, and this is her drug of choice. These slow down the central nervous system, and these drugs just produce a pure hallucination. These are not deemed to be physically dependent, because if you take it day one, wonderful sensations, you're hanging out and you're talking to Martin Luther King Jr., you talk about civil rights movement. The next day you're taking it, and you're doing a walk with Gandhi about proper civil disobedience. And the third day you take it and you listen to Rick Cernick talking about drugs. I bought a bad batch, right? Because these things are illegal. You're buying them off the street. So I buy a fourth day and it's still me droning on in your background. There is a phenomenon, a biological phenomenon called tachyphylaxis. Don't even worry about spelling it. But what it means is that tolerance builds quickly. So unlike the depressants and unlike the stimulants, tolerance to these hallucinogens builds after 2, 3, 4 days of regular use, which means when you take it, the senses are no longer disrupted, the brain has gotten used to it, and there's no effect, which is what's always made these drugs a perfect club or weekend party drugs. Friday, Saturday night, you party, hoping to buy something good from a good dealer who's selling you a good quality product. And that's it. You go back to your life Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, you party. And as long as you're taking safe measures, the relative risks are minor unless you buy a bad batch. And either 2 or 3 Christmases ago in Edmonton, there was 10 or 12 young people from university who all were hospitalized or died. And in fact, it was not ecstasy. It was a PMA or the PMMA, which is another derivative of it. So that's sort of the background. What we all want to talk about momentarily, right, is everyone's favorite drug right now those are good jokes, is this one, right? There is no such thing as a safe psychoactive drug. It does not exist. Cannabis was made illegal in Canada in 1923 because of a fear that women smoking cannabis would lose their sensibilities and inadvertently or be taken advantage of and have sex with racialized men. Now, that wasn't language that was used that day, and so you can just put your own 1923 language in. The book was called The Black Candle. There's a debate about how much influence it has. It was written by a Canadian suffragette, but certainly even among that movement, there was distinct racism in this nation of ours. And so cannabis was banned at the same time that heroin was banned and cocaine, and both of those drugs also had racist reasons for being banned. That's another lecture, another point in time. I've written a wonderful book called Depression of Addiction, and you can just bore yourself reading that piece right there. So number one, cannabis is not a safe drug. It produces all these things. Amotivational syndrome, right? Not wanting to do things. It produces anxiety. It impacts brain development. This phenomenon, it's a small minority of individuals who smoke cannabis on a regular basis end up having severe vomiting from it. That's what this CHS syndrome is. It affects your cognitive, it makes Crohn's disease worse, has impact on education, right? Number 3 cause of motor vehicle collisions in Canada. Poisonings. With the edibles, there's issue, again, with children. Most poisons are children. There's poisons with methadone, poisoning with Suboxones that are left in the fridges and houses. Then there's poisoning with edibles as well. It has a negative impact on pregnancy. For individuals whose families have that history of psychosis or schizophrenia, it increases the risk of it developing, because of course we never know if it's going to develop in an individual or not. It is a genetic crapshoot. And those individuals who have this condition, it worsens it. And yes, don't put anything hot into your lungs. Your lungs are meant to breathe air. Air is cooled. That's the purpose of your nose, right? All those nose fibers, it's to cool the air down to get your lungs. You put tobacco smoke, cocaine smoke, crystal meth smoke, cannabis smoke in your lungs, it's bad, 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 bad. Not that I have an opinion or anything. But, oh look, every single one of these I have not made up. Every single one of these has one or more empirical studies that demonstrates, indicates, or proves, right? There's different levels of studies going on now. We got pilot preliminary studies saying, hey, something good's going on here. We got larger studies saying, hey, we've seen a pattern here. And we've got clusters of studies saying this definitely has a positive impact. And for the most part, you're going to notice it is CBD. Why people like cannabis, right? is that it relaxes you. It relaxes that part of the brain. Tangent, breast milk, small amounts of endocannabinoids are expressed in breast milk from the nursing mother to the child. Endocannabinoids are part of your neurotransmitter system. It's one of the things that helps us relax. You've all got endocannabinoids in your system. This certainly just boosts it up. So the cannabis, THC, tetrahydrocannabinol, that's the part that's psychoactive. But there are a whole bunch of CBD cannabinoids within the cannabis product, primarily the female plant, if you're curious about that part. And so those of you looking for medical supports for your service users, absolutely. All of these items I have listed on the screen all have varying amounts of empirical support that CBD. So when you're buying your cannabis, right, is that, again, you're buying from the corner street, good for you. You know what? That's what we used to do when I was in high school too. So, but when you are able to go to a store or able to go to a pharmacy when this starts happening, is that the higher CBD concentration is the more of these therapeutic effects occur. The higher the THC concentration is that more of that relaxation, chilling, you know what, effect that you will get. You do what you need to do. Your service users do what they need to do. But again, you want to look at acute anxiety. So short-term use of cannabis will deal with anxiety, of CBD. Where is this good? This is good to help someone ease their anxiety so they can come talk to you, right? The same thing. We can raise the level of depression so a person can better engage and have conversation to deal with the psychosocial aspects. So in terms of us being social workers that do biopsychosocial, these certainly have utility. The CBD, so the person is not impaired and they can actually engage in you in conversation to do work with us. And it's got the epilepsy, absolutely, fibromyalgia, all sorts of things. And again, reduces symptoms of, not a cure for, but reduces symptoms of these various ailments. So my bottom line is always just say no. Are drugs good? Are drugs bad? And the answer, of course, is yes. Thank you for dealing with the technical difficulties. Thank you for having me prattle on much too quickly. The slides will be up for ongoing use. And Alexandra, if you're interested, I will answer some questions for people.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Rick. We have a lot of questions, and I just need to say the absolute expertise and knowledge you have blows my mind every time we have you on here. So thank you.
Wait, I got to do this now. Cheap moment. They're on my books. Buy my books. They're wonderful. Anyway, there we go. Go ahead.
Yes, I have read the first one, The Essential Guide, and it changed the way that I viewed drugs and substance use just fundamentally as a social worker. So keep that plug up there because it's worth it. So, okay. Yeah, it's worth it.
Look at baseball game. Look when there was real sports. There we go.
Exactly, right? Okay, so we do have a lot of questions, so I'm going to try and get through as many as we can in the next 15 minutes. If you did want to ask your questions, now would be the time. Yeah.
And again, here's my email. If I don't get your question and you really care about what I think, by all means, I'm marking, interesting enough, addiction papers in my summer addiction class now. If you send me an email, I'll probably get back to you in a week or so, and be happy to answer if we don't answer them here. So go ahead, Alexandra.
Love it. Okay, let's start. One of the big questions, what I've been hearing is actually about vaping. So the question is vaping effects, i.e. their contents, similar to nicotine effects? Kids say it's safer than cigarettes. Is this a myth or a fact?
Okay, excellent. So excellent use of the word safer. So the current generation of young people up until about 4 or 5 years ago were the lowest amount of smokers since we started recording it. So my generation in the 70s, we were up about 35% of young people were using tobacco. It's never been a majority, but it's been a significant minority. And so we've cut down on that. So vaping was initially introduced for individuals who are smoking tobacco. As I mentioned earlier, anything that's harsh, anything that's hot in your lungs is bad. And so vaping was a harm reduction mechanism to put cool vapor into your lungs as opposed to hot vapor, to get rid of some of the tobacco. And tobacco causes those carcinogen effects causes a lot of the secondary health effects. Nicotine produces the physical dependency and the craving to use more and more. So when a smoker tells you, having a cigarette or vaping relaxes me, they are incorrect. What happens is if they're vaping or smoking tobacco, is that they're relaxed. That's a sign of physical dependency. That tension is actually withdrawal, and the vaping relaxes it. So that's part of the answer. So certainly we know that it is safer if you're an existing tobacco smoker. If you've never smoked tobacco before and you start vaping, no, it is a very, very high risk. The vape does not have as much carcinogen smoke in it. It has some. It does not produce as much respiratory issues. It produces some. So to go from tobacco to vaping, thumbs up. To go from nothing to vaping is a health risk that will impact, and again, not to the same extent as smoking tobacco, but it will certainly have a negative health implications. Yes.
Yes. Awesome. That's an excellent response. Thank you. Vaping has definitely caught the attention of a lot of people recently, and so it's good to have some solid facts. Next question. Are the side effects of chronic use of cocaine similar to other stimulants that are used long-term, such as Concerta, that are in prescribed doses? Second part of that question would be, or are those symptoms related to how the cocaine is used or the amounts in which it is used?
My next presentation is going to be on sleeping. So sleeping is really important in drugs, but I'm not going to talk about that today. The issue is long-term cocaine, chronic cocaine use. So I'm talking about chronic cocaine use. There's two elements. When you've got a cocaine or a crystal methamphetamine run, so you're doing it every day for 14 days in a row, that puts you literally in a state of psychosis because of the stimulant effect and because of the lack of sleep. So that occurs. So in terms of comparing a cocaine to a Concerta or a Ritalin, is that the issue with cocaine and crystal meth is that they're illegal drugs. And again, drug dealers are the ultimate capitalists, and so they're not selling you pure cocaine or good crystal meth. They're adulterated with all sorts of other products, byproducts. And again, if you want to get quite ill, look at what they're making crystal meth out of, things like iodine. And with cocaine in labs, they put hydrochloric acid in it. There's all these secondary effects that a pharmaceutical drug doesn't have. So that's one piece of it, is that the chronic use will create physical damage to things like the mouth and the gums and the teeth, because those drugs dry out the mouth is dried out, your teeth fall out. There are issues, again, to the lungs. There are issues because of the byproducts. So a chronic cocaine user will have much more physical ailments. The other piece is the potency. And so certainly Concerta and Ritalin are on the same scale as cocaine. But again, it would be like comparing a codeine, which is a 0.1, morphine's a 1, and fentanyl is 100. Mm-hmm. So if we compare codeine with fentanyl, it's like 1,000 times difference. It's the same sort of thing when you're comparing Ritalin to street cocaine. It is certainly got the same properties. Mm-hmm. It can be misused, but in terms of overall potency, far, far less. And again, because it is pharmaceutical, there's still side effects, lots of side effects, but you don't have all the issues of adulterants and impurities in the drug.
That's an excellent point. I think that we often try to look at everything in the purest sense of the form, and we forget that when we're engaging in especially drugs that are not legal, that oftentimes we're not talking just about the pure drug itself. So thank you. Yeah.
And for individuals who have traveled, I went to Ecuador a few years ago on doing some work, and first in Ecuador is at like 9,000 foot elevation, Quito, the capital. Yes. And so the first thing you do is they give you coca tea, right? Because it's part of the natural culture. Yeah. So again, that's a good point, Alexandra, is the fact that, what's the potency? And even coca in small doses is not an issue.
I've been in the exact same place as you, Rick. And I've also had coca tea, and it's, I remember wondering what that would mean in terms of coca leaves and coca tea as opposed to cocaine. But yeah.
And just be ready when you come back there, because when I came back at Pearson, when we could still fly, is that the drug dogs went up and down me twice. So they'll when we come back to that part of the world, the drug dogs are all over you. So.
Yes, definitely. I have the same thing. Okay. Can you speak to the use of prescribed Ativan Concerta for young alcoholic males or any one who has a history of alcoholism and alcohol relapses?
Yeah, there are way better drugs we have out there. This is a very long, whoever asked this question, send me an email. I'm actually sending this section of my book that talks about all the alternatives. Ativan is used for someone that's a chronic alcohol user so they don't go into seizure or negative withdrawal. It's used for individuals to sort of, or should be used as a harm reduction tool because it's not as, the side effects and the effects of taking Ativan are not nearly as harsh on the body as consuming large amounts of alcohol. So the GP or the psychiatrist prescribing that is for the physical withdrawal effects and to keep the person out of seizuring or having large withdrawal cravings. If the person actually wants to deal with an anti-alcohol drug to decrease the alcohol consumption, there's a whole different classification of drugs for that.
Yeah. Yeah. So please reach out to Rick, in other words, as well.
And I have no idea why they'd be giving that person Concerta other than, actually, we would have to talk about why that being given Concerta because that actually confuses me. But there may be an explanation, but we'd have to talk about the case in greater detail.
Absolutely. One of the questions, and maybe this is a little bit more of a comment, but hopefully you could expand on it a little bit more, is that one of our attendees said, "Thank you for the fantastic webinar, Rick. Interesting note on the side on the effects of opioids, as I have clients who were former drug users and I could never sympathize with the physical pain they were enduring." So are you able to speak a little bit more to the withdrawals of opioid use in terms of social work?
Again, being male, I have never given birth to a child. I have been through both of my partner's birth, and they're both high stress. And so those men who have been through a birth, they can see it, but they can't really truly empathize it. And then I had a kidney stone one day. So if you want to appreciate what true pain is, as a male and as a sucky male, is that when I had a large kidney stone, the pain was so severe that I was throwing up from pain. And so this is a type, when we're talking about physical pain, extreme physical pain, is that you can imagine that, and again, I don't want to imagine this too late, but I'm literally lying on the ground in a fetal position, and my wife comes in and says, "What's wrong?" I said, "I'm not well." And she goes, "Do you want to go to the hospital?" And I go, "Yes." And then she turns white because I never say yes going to the hospital because I worked in one for a while. No offense to front enders, is that when you're in the hospital, you have a different appreciation being in and being out. So again, all the support to the individuals. But when you've got a level of pain that your body cannot handle, right? And so you've got pain. Okay, better yet, for all of you, think about the last time you had the real flu, like real flu, not stomach flu, but real flu. The point in time when you're hot, cold at the same point in time you got nothing in your system and you still want to vomit, that type of flu. And I can take that pain away in 15 seconds. I can give you ease and I can give you comfort from the worst pain you've had in 15 seconds. I mean, sign me up. I mean, that's what you get when you're taking an injection opioid. That's what you get if you crush up OxyContin and stick it up your nose. You get this relief from physical pain. And then, of course, we add all the emotional pain that our service users have, right? And that's gone as well. You don't have to worry about the trauma from your childhood, the trauma of your dead child, the trauma of your separation and divorce. You don't have to worry about those things for the next 4 or 5 hours. I mean, is that not a kind of vacation that just calls out to you?
Absolutely. I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions. So if you have them now, you can type them as they come to your mind and we'll try and get through them. Rick, are you able to provide any kind of comments on social workers who are trying to help those with marijuana dependencies to alleviate the marijuana or the dependency that they have on that kind of numbing behavior and feeling?
Yeah. And so there's 2 aspects to this as a social worker too. So obviously, because our primary mechanism of support is through counseling, you want to make sure that people coming into you are not impaired, right? So you want to be able to communicate with them and make sure they're not active, have active THC in their system such that they can't hear you. So the question always becomes for me is why? What's the motivator? And so how does an addiction begin? I'm not sure if I gave this example on my last webinar, but it's my favorite one. Is that so when my son Ben was born, he weighed about 9 pounds, right? He fit in the crook of my arm. I carried him around, right? I carried him around, and now when he comes home and he's 25 years old and he's 6'1" and 185 pounds, he comes home and picks me up and carries me around. So how did that happen? Because I just had him in the crook of my arm. And that's what happens with an addiction. Is, you know, I'm just smoking a little weed every now and then. I've had a bad day, I'll smoke more. Yeah, my friends aren't calling me anymore. I really feel like going out. It's suddenly it just, instead of you carrying it, it carries you. So, I mean, the first notion is how much are you using? Taking a log, finding out when you're using. So don't use when you come to see me. Start making a log of when you're using, what the factors are, physical, psychological, all those elements. And what we want to do is we want to obviously replace the cannabis. So there's a couple of things you can do in terms of the harm reduction piece is, as with anything, is we decrease the frequency, we understand when we use, and then you want to decrease potency. So if someone's using THC levels at 15, and you cut them down to 12. If they're smoking 6 times a day, cut them down to 5. And during this point in time is then you're dealing with what we do well with. What are the underlying reasons? What led you to use this? What are the coping mechanisms you have? So you're doing the bio, which is tapering potency and tapering frequency, with dealing with psychosocial issues that led to drug use, and then replacing and providing alternative coping mechanisms. So again, that tri-party approach is my 30-second recommendation.
Yeah, and also you could learn a lot more from the books that Rick has written in terms of wanting to.
Go ahead.
It's true, but it's true. Like, I mean, that's a really quick, condensed version of it. You know, cutting back dependency, cutting back frequency, starting to address those underlying causes. This is all information that I think that we can continue and discussions that we can continue to have. But thank you for that quick review of it.
Yeah. And the key piece, though, is don't ignore the bio. The bio is really important in addiction. That drug, what the drug does to you physically and what the drug does for you emotionally, psychologically. We can't do our gig, right? We can't do our strengths when individuals are having their emotions and their behaviors numbed by the drug. So you've got to deal with it systematically.
Yeah, that's a great point. This is kind of a little bit more of a fun question, but I've heard about a lot of the benefits of alcohol, such as red wine is good for the heart. Can you talk a little bit about the truth to this, and maybe do those benefits outweigh the risks?
Yeah. Look, did I ever have a drink? I sure did. Do you know when I stopped drinking? I stopped drinking when I have my 7-year-old staring at me and I'm having a beer at the table going, how can I tell my 7-year-old this is bad for him? And I'm sucking down, and it was really good beer. It's that the Irish stuff. Anyway, so number one is that of course alcohol's fun. We wouldn't drink poison if it wasn't fun. But let me tell you what, literally it's poison. But let me tell you about growing up and being a fish that sees the water you swim in. When we were kids, we laughed, we played, we had fun without any sort of, psychoactive substances. As we become older, our ability to laugh and enjoy, because we have adult problems. We've got mortgage, we've got pandemics, we got service users in crisis. We've got all these issues. And so everyone's big on mindfulness, right? My students are huge on mindfulness. I talk about mindfulness, blah, blah, blah. No offense to mindfulness people, right? But the question is, mindfulness is wonderful, introspective. But when was the last time you had fun? Before the pandemic, I got out with my 25, the one that used to be in my arm, my 25-year-old. I got out the old croquet set with him and his new partner, who's just lovely, in case she ever watches this. And we played croquet. And I've got this 25-year-old and his 24-year-old partner howling in my backyard as we're knocking around a croquet ball. And so, alcohol produces fun. It provides a social setting. True fact, people who consume alcohol on average have larger social circles than individuals who do not. But there's a cultural piece where we've associated sport with alcohol, entertainment with alcohol, coping with alcohol. So again, not that I don't drink, not that there's alcohol in my house right now. I've got a Hires root beer vodka thing someone gave me going, oh good, now we're really promoting alcohol to young people. So go and have a glass of wine, enjoy it, sit in the patio. There's no doubt when I go on holidays to Panama that I will have a Corona beer to spite everybody. and because it relaxes and slows you down.
Yeah.
Always know why you drink. I always know why I'm drinking. I told my two boys, know why you're drinking. If you're drinking because you're sad, it's the wrong reason. If you're drinking because everyone else around you is drinking, it's the wrong reason. If you're drinking because you're in a good spot and you want to just chill for an hour or two and you're not going to drive, by all means, have a Long Island iced tea.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So we're going to try and wrap it up here. I wish we could stay on all day. My final question, I do. It's like such a nice, to spend time with everyone as well on this platform has been so lovely. This one might be a little bit harder, but I'm wondering if you can kind of wrap up the presentation with a bit of an ode to COVID and potentially the increases in substance use and the increases in what's gonna happen after the lockdown and quarantine measures kind of start easing and people start going back to life. Can you speak a little bit towards that?
Yeah, I think we all know that we're going to be inundated with service users with issues of anxiety and depression, loss and isolation. We're going to have all sorts of grief issues coming at us because of what's occurred. I subscribe to 3 news sites, one from the US, one from Europe, and one from Canada. And all the literature from across the English-speaking world that I'm reading is talking about people as the isolation goes on, that their alcohol consumption is increasing. We know that the importation of illegal drugs has not stopped. We're getting a few more drug busts because few people in the streets, but as we sort of move back to opening things up, the access to drugs will be there. And there's no doubt that there has been an increase in alcohol consumption. There's a big rush initially when people thought there's going to be a lockdown, but that drinking has gone up. My students just finished doing their online AA and NA assignments, and I'm reading their assignments right now, and they're talking about they're reporting in their assignments about just the anxiety among members in Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous, how their triggers are up, how they are feeling much more stressed, how they're attending, again, these are people active, attending more meetings than they would be otherwise because of the social isolation, not having people to talk to. So again, the gray literature, just a sort of buzz on the street, seems to indicate there have been increases among at-risk populations, and that there will be certainly work to do in this area come opening up.
Yeah, definitely. I would echo that. All right. Well, with that, we are at our time. We will likely welcome Rick back for another webinar in a series of picking his brain, I'm going to call it.
Drugging Rick, that's what everyone wants to come to.
Exactly. So if we didn't answer your question, of course, Rick had mentioned you can drop him a line. You can obviously drop us a line at the CSW as well, and we can do our best to answer that for you if we have the information. If you need your certificate of attendance, it should just be that little yellow widget in the bottom there, and you'll be able to access that anytime. You can log off today and come back anytime to see it. This presentation converts on demand about 24 hours after it, so you can log back on and rewatch it or share it with your colleagues, anything you want to do. I also put a link to our Facebook peer-to-peer support group in your resource section that a lot of social workers have been using as a place to come together. And I hope that the conversations about drugs and social work response continue on that peer-to-peer support group as well. With all that being said, I'm going to wrap it up. Any final thoughts, Rick?
Stay well, still safe, everybody. I'm not sure if anyone ever tells us what a good job we're doing as an academic and a professor. I have the privilege of working with field instructors and lots of social workers during their time. I've told all my third-year social work students as part of their assignment, they have to go home and watch It's a Wonderful Life, right? So if you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed, a little bit stressed, just be the character. If you've not seen the movie, damn it, go see that movie. It's free. Take your space, take yourself out of time and space, right? And see the big hole you leave behind, right? So just keep doing the good work and know that we make all these ripples in time, and keep doing it.
Yeah. Keep doing it. Keep doing your important work. Social workers are needed now, maybe more than ever, and having these different lenses and these different opportunities for continuing education and to come together are very important right now. So thank you so much for supporting our work and supporting what we do and spending an hour and a half with us today. We will see you very soon. Bye-bye.